Bear with me. Okay, I think you've seen by now the Secretary's memo to the message to the force about COVID vaccines. That's public now, so I'm not going to reread it for you. I think you all can get the gist of it. I would just point out that there's sort of three elements here to it. One is that he will request approval from the president for a waiver to make the COVID vaccines mandatory by mid-September. He'll make the request for the waiver by mid-September. I've seen some reporting out there that means that all the troops have to be vaccinated by mid-September. That's not accurate. He'll make the request by mid-September unless or until FDA licensure occurs before that time, at which point the Secretary has the authority he needs upon FDA licensure to make whatever vaccine is then given that license mandatory. I just want to clear that up. That's point number one. Point number two, in the meantime, two things are going to happen. One, the services are going to be tasked to come back to the Secretary with implementation plans for how they're going to get this moving. And there is not probably a lot of time between now, certainly not a lot of time between now and mid-September. But if FDA licensure comes sooner than that, and there's press reporting to suggest that the Pfizer vaccine will be perhaps even completely approved by the end of this month. So the services have a fair but limited amount of time to come back to the Secretary with their implementation plans for how they would go about mandatory vaccines for all their personnel. We have to understand, of course, that they have their own deployment schedules, their own manning constructs, their own differences in unvaccinated numbers. And so we're going to be respectful of that. The second thing that will happen in the meantime is that we are going to be developing policies to comply with the president's direction that the unvaccinated will have to be subjected to certain requirements and restrictions. I don't have the details for all of that today. We're working hard on what will be a policy directive to come in the coming days that will make it clear what those requirements and restrictions are and how they apply to everybody in the DoD workforce, including uniformed personnel. And then the last thing that I'd say about this memo is, and I hope you caught towards the end of it, where the Secretary says we're going to watch the trends closely. We're seeing an uptick in cases, uptick in hospitalizations across the force, as we are in the country, and the Delta variant is a factor in that. So we're going to watch it closely. And as the Secretary told the force today, if he needs to act sooner than this timeline, then he'll do that. So we're going to watch the trends and make sure that we're keeping readiness of the force at the forefront. So that's the memo. A couple of other things that I want to hit, if I can get this to work. As you may have seen, the Senate confirmed Carlos Del Toro, a former surface warfare officer, as the 78th Secretary of the Navy. As the Secretary noted in his statement, Mr. Del Toro was a student of the U.S. Naval Academy, Naval Postgraduate School, Naval War College. He rose to the ranks to serve as the first commanding officer of the destroyer Bulkley, DDG-84, and then he later worked at senior levels here in the Pentagon. The Secretary is delighted to have him on board. He should be sworn in here very, very shortly, and that will round out our service secretaries. Each of the military departments now have a Senate-confirmed, fully installed service secretary, and the Secretary is grateful for Mr. Del Toro's willingness to serve his country again here in the Department of the Navy. I also want to recognize Chris Mayer for his Senate confirmation over the weekend to be our next Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations Command and Low-Intensity Conflict. Now, as many of you know, the Secretary signed a directive in May that maintaining that position, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict, otherwise known as SOLIC, and that's how I'll talk about it for the rest of this, as a principal, to sign a directive maintaining that job as a principal staff assistant who has full access to the same floor that the service secretaries will have. He also made SOLIC an integral part of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy. This special dual-hatted approach strengthened civilian oversight of the special operations enterprise while ensuring integrated policy advice on special operations, counterterrorism, and irregular warfare to the Secretary. Now, I think you all know Chris. He's worked on these issues in and around the department for his entire career. Nobody better for this job, and we look forward to his leadership and stewardship in this very, very important position. On the exercise front, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is now conducting what they call Large-Scale Global Exercise 21. LSGE 21 through the 27th of this month. It began back on the 2nd. The exercise is a proof of concept global command and control pilot exercise with a regional focus, linking existing planned service joint and multilateral exercises to conduct an operational level maneuver. U.S. forces will participate alongside the United Kingdom, the Australian Defense Force, and the Japanese Self-Defense Force. LSGE 21 is an all-domain exercise across the Indo-Pacific in air, land, and sea, field training, cyber and space operations, and special operations activities and logistics. It's going to improve our interoperability, it's going to strengthen our alliances and partnerships, and it offers a complex and challenging multinational environment for forces to hone their skills. Now, while the Navy's Pacific forces are duly nested under LSGE 21, the United States Navy's large-scale exercise, LSE 21, is running through August 16th, with naval forces operating around the globe to include more than 80 live and virtual units spanning 17 time zones and 6 naval and Marine Corps component commands. Units will participate in live and virtual scenario-driven, globally integrated fleet training. This, again, demonstrates the flexibility of our distributed maritime operations and expeditionary and littoral operations within a contested environment. And it'll include, as I said, live and both simulated training as well as real-world operations. And then finally, I want to take a chance here to welcome our new, in public affairs, our new Principal Deputy Assistant to the Secretary, Elizabeth Trudeau. She's coming to us from the State Department, career Foreign Service officer at very senior levels. She was a consul general just recently in Belfast, and before that in Lahore, Pakistan. As some of you know, I worked closely with Elizabeth when I had the opportunity to work at the State Department a few years ago. No finer professional, and I'm really excited to have her on board to help me communicate for the department. So is she in the room? Nope, she's not here. But I encourage you to come on by, say hi to her, shake her hand if you haven't met her before. And again, I just can't thank her enough for being willing to depart from the normal career Foreign Service track in the State Department and come over here to the Pentagon for a little while to help us do a better job communicating. So I'm grateful to her, and I'm sure you all will have a good time working with her. So with that, we'll take questions. I think Lita's on the phone.
Thanks, John. One quick thing on vaccines, and then I have a second question. On the vaccines, does the department believe that it has enough of the vaccine to meet requirements if and when the president does approve the waiver or something, or it does become formal? And you may not be able to answer this because the implementation plans aren't in yet, but are there enough vaccines, and then does it get rolled out in phases? And then my second question is on a different topic. Do you want to wait?
Yeah, let's wait. So on the inventory, we don't believe the inventory is going to be a problem. Again, that's one of the reasons why the Secretary is given the services a couple of weeks to come back with their implementation plans, and certainly any concerns that they might have about inventory. And I can't speak to service inventory. You'd really have to go to them. But we will make sure that the inventory will not be a limiting factor here when these vaccines are made mandatory. And then as for phases, again, that's what we're looking for from the services leader to come back to tell the Secretary how best they think they can implement once the vaccines are made mandatory, because each service is unique. Each one has a different unvaccinated population. Each one has different deployment and operational and exercise demands. I just went through a bunch of exercises in the Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot of different intrinsic cultural and operational issues that the services will have to factor in, and the Secretary is interested in hearing their plans for doing it in the most efficient way. There will be a reporting requirement for the services to come back to the Secretary on a periodic basis to let him know how they're doing. Again, we don't have all the details of exactly what that reporting process is going to look like, but as soon as we get closer, we'll certainly make sure that everybody's aware. What was your second question?
Afghanistan. You're aware, I'm sure, about Kunduz over the weekend. With this, with the Taliban clearly rolling along at this point, does the Secretary believe that the U.S. should increase the amount of airstrikes and support it's giving to the Afghans? And can you say whether or not the Pentagon is making any recommendations to be allowed to do airstrikes beyond August 31st as currently planned? Thank you.
On the second part, I don't have anything to update with respect to what authorities might exist after August 31st. I think when the Secretary was last here at the podium, he said that our focus is on executing the authorities and using the capabilities we have through the end of the drawdown, which is at the end of the month. And I'm simply not going to speculate what things are going to look like beyond that. On your first question, the Secretary shares the concern of the international community about the security situation in Afghanistan, which is clearly not going in the right direction. And the Secretary continues to believe that the Afghan forces have the capability, they have the capacity to make a big difference on the battlefield. He has maintained that we will continue to support them with the authority where and when feasible, understanding that it's not always going to be feasible. But where and when feasible, we'll continue to support them with airstrikes, for instance. The other thing is we're focused, as we should be, given the president's direction, we're focused on completing the drawdown by the end of the month and by transitioning to a different bilateral relationship with Afghan forces that will be one of support, financial and logistical maintenance support from outside the country. That's the focus. That's what we're driving at. But again, as we have the authorities and capabilities, and obviously we have fewer capabilities now than we did before the drawdown. But as we have them and have them available, we'll use them where and when feasible.
Follow-up about Afghanistan, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, John. I appreciate it. As she mentioned, Taliban increased their attacks in Afghanistan and they control most of the key provinces in Afghanistan. Even President Ghani and his Prime Minister, Afghan Prime Minister, said that behind of those Taliban activity, Pakistan. And people ask, Afghan people ask that why United States, especially Pentagon, doesn't bring pressure on Pakistan. And we don't, Afghan people did not understand that Pakistan is their enemy or a friend. The expectation is very high to bring pressure on Pakistan.
We continue to have conversations with Pakistani leadership about the safe havens that exist along that border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we're mindful that those safe havens are only providing a source of more insecurity, more instability inside Afghanistan. And we're not bashful about having that discussion with Pakistani leaders. We're also mindful that Pakistan and the Pakistani people also fall victim to terrorist activities that emanate from that same region. So we're all, we all have a shared sense of the importance of closing down those safe havens and not allowing them to be used by the Taliban or other terrorist networks to sow discord. And again, we're having that conversation with the Pakistanis all the time.
John,
Yeah, go ahead, Lucas.
John, why aren't you doing more to help the Afghan forces?
As I said, Lucas, we are continuing to support them. And I assume you're asking about airstrikes, I'm guessing, because we are helping Afghan forces in a myriad of other ways. But I'm assuming that's your question. And as I said to Lita, nothing has changed about the fact that we have the authorities to do it throughout the drawdown. We have some capability to do it from obviously over the horizon, and the strikes that we have taken have all been from over the horizon. And we'll continue to use those capabilities where and when feasible. But as I said, Lucas, it's not always going to be feasible in every case. And the Taliban have been making advances, no question. The Afghans have capacity. They have capability. They have a capable Air Force. And as I said weeks ago, I think whatever the outcome here, when we look back, we're going to be able to know, we're going to be able to say that it was driven by leadership, Afghan leadership, political and military leadership. That's what's vital here.
When you say that the Afghan forces have the means to defend themselves, what proof do you have? They've lost now 6 provincial capitals in Afghanistan.
I have the proof that they have a force of over 300,000 soldiers and police. They have a modern Air Force, an Air Force, by the way, which we continue to contribute to and to improve. They have modern weaponry. They have an organizational structure. They have a lot of advantages that the Taliban don't have. Taliban doesn't have an Air Force. Taliban doesn't own airspace. They have a lot of advantages. now they have to use those advantages. They have to exert that leadership, and it's got to come both from the political and from the military side.
Any sign that they're using those advantages right now in the country?
I'm not going to get into an assessment every day here, Lucas, district by district, provincial capital by provincial capital, where, as I said at the very beginning of my answer, the Secretary's watching this closely, and we're deeply concerned about the trends and where it's going. The reason why not is because it's their country to defend now. This is their struggle. The Commander-in-Chief has given us a new mission, and that mission is to draw down by the end of this month, and that's where we're moving to. What it looks like beyond that, I'm simply not going to speculate. But this is their country. These are their military forces. These are their provincial capitals. Their people to defend, and it's really going to come down to the leadership that they're willing to exude here at this particular moment.
Sorry,
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
John, as far as United Nations are concerned, have United Nations asked or their members any role in Afghanistan now after the U.S. leaves Afghanistan? And also, what role you think now India and Pakistan should or are playing there?
I won't answer the UN question. That's really for my colleagues at the State Department and the UN ambassador up in New York City. That's out of our lane. But to your second question, we want all neighboring countries, to not take actions that make the situation in Afghanistan more dangerous than it is already, and to continue to try to use international pressure to get a negotiated, peaceful political settlement to this war.
Just quickly follow. As far as India is concerned, since Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State both were in India, and also now Prime Minister Modi means India is chairing the United Nations Security Council chairmanship now. You think U.S. have ever asked India or India asked U.S. About India's role in Afghanistan now?
I'm not aware of discussions between the U.S. and India bilaterally at the UN level. As you know, India has played a constructive role in Afghanistan in the past in terms of training and other infrastructure improvements. Clearly, that kind of work, that kind of effort to help Afghanistan, maintain stability and good governance is always welcome. But in terms of the specifics, I would again refer you to my State Department colleagues.
Exactly.
I got to go to the phone, guys. I'm sorry. Let me just do a couple here. Dan Segallen, PBS.
Thanks. Are you surprised that Afghan security forces are unable to hold, are unable to stop the Taliban's onslaught? Or is this kind of momentum that the Taliban has something that is expected?
I would say we're again deeply concerned by the security situation in Afghanistan. I would remind you, Dan, that even before the president made his decision about withdrawal, even before the president took office, the Taliban had been making advances on the ground. Now, clearly, those advances have accelerated and deepened. Nobody's walking away from that, but it's not that their desires we weren't seeing the kinds of things that they were interested in on the ground.
But you're concerned. But what about surprise? You're not surprised.
I think I've characterized it appropriately, Dan. We're concerned, and we've made that concern clear about the deteriorating security situation on the ground. JJ Green.
Yeah, thank you, John. So you've outlined what the advantages are that the Afghan forces have and what the Taliban doesn't have. Then what can answer, to your knowledge and to the Pentagon's understanding, why they're not having more success in dealing with what the Taliban essentially has been rolling out systematically for a while now? Why is it that they're not able to respond at a higher level?
Yeah, JJ, I'm not going to speak for another military and give assessments here of their battlefield performance on a day-to-day basis. As I said at the outset, I think whatever the outcomes are, when we look back on this, we're going to see that leadership in the field, leadership in Kabul were really the keys. And I think I'd leave it at that. And one more from the phones here. Stephen Losey, military.com.
Hi, thanks. So how is the service going to track compliance for the COVID vaccine and verify that people who got the shot elsewhere, like not in a military facility, like guardsmen or reservists, have actually been vaccinated and aren't just claiming that they did. My second question is, what are the consequences going to be for those who continue to refuse to get the shot? Is this going to be punished like a refusal to obey a lawful order?
So I think the first question you're referring to is what the interim between now and when it's mandatory. Because once the vaccine is mandatory, your inoculations go into your electronic medical record. So it's documented that way. So if you're talking about what's going to happen between now and then, as I said at the very beginning of the press conference, we are working through what will be a policy directive to the services to lay it out for them. What do the new restrictions and requirements ordered by the president, what does that mean for uniformed personnel? So I just don't have that answer right now. Your second question is about, I'm guessing what you're talking about is once the vaccines are mandatory and if a member were to refuse after it became an order, a lawful order. I'm not going to speculate and get into hypotheticals right now, but I think you saw in the Secretary's memo of today that he has full confidence that service leadership and commanders are going to implement the new vaccination program with professionalism, skill, and with compassion. And I think I'd leave it at that for now. Okay, back to the room, Megan.
What is the actual deadline for the service leadership to get their plans to the Secretary?
He did not issue a specific deadline in this memo. They were already, some of them were already working on the potential, because all of us had a sense that this was coming. But he did not give them an actual deadline. He does not expect that it's going to take them very long to come back with implementation plans. But he wants those implementation plans ready before, certainly before the middle of September. Obviously, we'd like to see those plans submitted earlier than that, because it's possible that we could reach FDA licensure on at least one vaccine, perhaps as early as the end of the month. He met with the service secretaries this morning. They all understand the timing here, and the secretary's not worried about them meeting a certain deadline on the calendar. They all know what they have to do in the time frame within which they have to do it.
And a follow-up, given there's already kind of an accountability infrastructure for ongoing vaccines while you're in uniform, what needs to be hammered out? Flu vaccines are given every year. There's an accountability, that's in the computer. If you don't get your flu vaccine, there's already consequences. So what needs to be hammered out when this infrastructure already exists?
Adding a vaccine to the mandatory list doesn't happen every day, Megan. It's a big muscle movement, and the Secretary wants to give the services ample time to prepare for that, as well as the force. I mean, this has been, as you and I have gone back and forth here for months, I mean, it's been a voluntary vaccine from as soon as the time we had them, and now shifting to eventually making it a mandatory vaccine, a required vaccine. That's a big shift, not just for the system and our military treatment facilities, but also for the force itself. And you can consider this memo today as what we would call in the military a warning order to the force that this is coming, and we want you to be ready for it as well. And obviously, we prefer that that you get the vaccine now and not wait for the mandate.
So that mid-September date, then, is that more trying to line up with these FDA approvals, given that you don't think that it's going to take very long for plans to be put together, and the Secretary's not going to take very long to approve those plans? Why wait more than a month to get this done?
Again, we think that FDA licensure will probably occur at least in one case sooner than that. And this was really determined to give enough time and space for the force, a very geographically dispersed, operationally able and out there force, to get ready for the potential mandatory issuance of these vaccine. It was in the Secretary's determination an ample amount of time to prepare, keeping in mind that we may have to move sooner based on FDA approval, when the Secretary has approval authority once FDA licensure occurs. So it was a combination of factors. Okay? Courtney.
I got a bunch. Okay, so,
Let me get my pen.
well, you come to me like at the end of the briefing, I just keep adding more. So is the assumption that the reason that there was no mention of a waiver in that memo is because the assumption is that it's going to get full authorization prior to this becoming mandatory for military?
No, there was a mention of a waiver. He in the memo itself,
But I don't think it says there's a waiver unless I'm mistaken. Or, so
I will
guess let me
seek the
ask-
president's approval to make the vaccines mandatory. That's the same as saying a waiver.
Okay, so he is asking for a waiver. as
He
of today.
intends to ask for a waiver by mid-September unless or until FDA licensure occurs first.
Okay. And then, and if it becomes mandatory before it has the full FDA authorization, then what will the difference be then if service members then still refuse, even if it's, because it's different then, right? Like if it,
Not really.
I guess will there be consequences if a service member refuses before it has full authorization from the FDA?
So I mean, two parts there. Let's say that FDA licensure doesn't come, and by mid-September, he seeks the waiver, and the president grants that waiver. They then become added to the list of vaccines that are required of all service members in the military. I won't speculate about consequences on the back end. It would be premature to do that, but it then becomes a required vaccine, just like all the other vaccines, and I think there's 17 total. There's 8 at least I know of that you have to get just to go to boot camp. It just becomes part of that regimen, and I think the secretary believes that the men and women of the military, even the ones that have been hesitant, will comply with that. Should it take that? But what he's asking for in this message to the force today is don't wait. They're safe, they're effective, they work, they make us a more ready force, a more lethal force, and there's no reason to wait for the mandate.
And then once it becomes mandatory, will the DoD now then provide declination rates if people do decline?
I don't know. I don't know if we've made that decision, Courtney.
And then I have one Afghanistan one. You mentioned that the Taliban advances have accelerated and deepened. Does that mean that the Taliban is moving, sort of rolling through these areas, taking areas faster than the Pentagon or than the military had expected? And if so, why do you think that's occurring?
I don't want to get into an assessment of faster than was expected or not expected. Clearly, the security situation is deteriorating. And just over the last, 72 hours, roughly 5 provincial capitals fell to the Taliban. That's deeply concerning. Again, I don't want to get into a statement about surprise or not. It's concerning, and we're watching that very closely.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Sarah with Istiklal. The U.S. Navy has sent aircraft to Greece to help with forest fires, and at weekend, U.S. Embassy in Ankara made a statement and announced that 2 of CH-47 Chinooks will be deployed to Turkey as well, which also is battling with wildfires. Are you aware of its process and when they will be there?
I think in the case of Greece, a P-8 Poseidon maritime surveillance aircraft was already provided to assist Greek authorities with basically getting a better picture. It's a surveillance aircraft, a reconnaissance aircraft, sorry. So the request was for help with them getting a better understanding of the scope of the wildfires. And that aircraft has already been provided. They flew operations in support of Greek authorities over the course of the weekend, from the 5th to the 7th of August. As for the situation in Turkey, at the request of the Turkish government, U.S. Army Europe and Africa is sending 2 CH-47 Chinook aircraft. They're equipped with water delivery buckets, so they are actually going to be involved in helping put out the fires. At, again, the request of the Turkish government. I don't have the details on whether they're there yet, whether they've started flying yet. I'd refer you to U.S. Army Europe and Africa to give. They'd have a much better sense. But I do know that the Turkish government asked for that, and we are providing that. Different kind of help, but still willing to lean in and help our partners. Janie.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you.
You have a what?
I have a couple questions for you.
Okay.
Yes. You may have seen this report that there was recently a F-16 fighters emergency sortie from Kunsan Air Base in South Korea. Why did the Department of Defense release this fact right after the North Korean Kim Yo-jong demanded the cancellation of the U.S. South Korea joint military exercise?
I don't have anything specific on these reported sorties. What I can tell you is that F-16s and other U.S. Air Force aircraft routinely fly out of Kunsan Air Base, and they conduct training missions and support regional security right alongside with our ROC allies. Flying aircraft out of Kunsan is not unusual, and again, part of the normal security arrangement with the ROK.
Do you have any background on this? Because why they have emergency sortie, that is not regular exercise.
No, I honestly don't think I can answer it better a second time.
Okay, another one. It is reported that the South Korean National Intelligence Service detained the spy who received the orders from North Korea to obstruct the purchase of F-35 fighters from United States. Are there any problem with the purchase contract?
I don't have anything for you on that.
Can you take action for that?
No, I'm not going to take that question because you're talking about it's first of all, it's an intelligence question related to another nation's intelligence services, and that we are just not going to speak. We're going to speak to something like that.
In my case, they will have a lot of damage between US and South Korea.
I appreciate your interest in this, but I think that's a better question put to our ROK allies, not to the United States Department of Defense.
Because they reduced the purchase from F-35, you know. Okay, this is the last question. China also demanded the U.S. cancellation of U.S. and South Korea joint military exercise. Also, South Korean lawmakers signed the suspend of the joint military exercise. The point is, South Korean government dealing with the joint exercise politically, not from the military perspective. You mentioned in the last briefing. What is your comment on this? Because are there any differences between U.S. and South Korea in terms of the military perspective?
I'm certainly not going to speak to domestic politics inside South Korea. Again, that's for the South Korean legislators to speak to. Nothing's changed about our need for readiness on the Korean Peninsula and our desire to work in lockstep with our ROK allies on training regimen that improves that readiness and keeps that readiness strong. And we make these decisions, as I've said many, many times before, in lockstep with our ROK allies, and that's not going to change.
You always fundamental answer this, so I need a fundamental answer.
I gave you a fundamental answer. You just don't like it. But it is an accurate answer.
I'm going to ask you, what is your view of the
I just
military
gave you,
perspective, not a...
Nobody cares about my view of anything. I gave you the department's view of training and readiness on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you.
Mike.
A bit of clarification on the September 15th date.
Yeah, don't get hung up on 15 September. I've seen that in some of the press reporting. It says by mid-September.
Right, but I think that the president, the White House released a statement from the president already saying he strongly supports the secretary's decision to add it to the list. So QE, I mean, so the DoD has permission right now. I mean, the president has said, "I support you. Go ahead." I mean, is that just to give them the services breathing room to sort of get their ducks in a line?
I mean, you still have to get, we certainly saw the president's statement and grateful for it, for the support that he very clearly iterated in that. But you still, unless FDA licensure has occurred, you still need a waiver for the authorization, you still need a formal waiver by the President of the United States, which we do not have right now. So while we obviously saw and appreciate the President's statement of support, we would still be compelled by law to ask for that waiver. Obviously, given the President's statement, we certainly don't expect any problem with that, but it's a process issue.
Okay. And another question, different topic. Apparently, there's been some commercial satellite images have spotted a couple of ICBM fields in China. Is the Pentagon concerned about China's rapid nuclear buildup?
I'm not going to speak to the imagery issue, and certainly I'm not going to get into intelligence assessments. We have maintained since the beginning of the administration our concerns about the kinds of military capabilities that China is procuring and putting into the field and into the fleet, which and the way in which they're using some of these capabilities to coerce their neighbors. And that's why the Secretary considers China the number one pacing challenge for the department. That's why he's now made 2 international trips to the region, in part why he made two trips to the region. And it's why we're doing so much to revitalize our alliances and partnerships. And you've heard him talk about integrated deterrence and making sure that we have the appropriate capacity and capabilities, not just in the joint force, but among our allies and partners, to provide a credible, viable deterrent capability for any adversary in that part of the world. Okay, let me go to the phones. I don't want to neglect them too much. Jeff Selden, VOA.
Hey, John, thanks very much for doing this. A couple questions on Afghanistan. Given that U.S. airstrikes are all over the horizon, and it means the planes, the platforms are up in the air for some time, to what extent is the Pentagon concerned that the Taliban have been able to kind of map out the routes that the U.S. is taking here in order to coordinate their offensives to miss where the planes are most likely to be? And also, how much can the U.S. do in cases where it seems like we saw over the weekend where Afghan forces don't put up any fight or don't put up a fight for very long before retreating?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that second question? There was a knocking in your phone. I couldn't.
Yeah, sorry about that. The second question is, how much is the U.S. able to do to help Afghan security forces in cases like we saw over the weekend where it seems the Afghan forces aren't putting up much of a fight or not putting up a fight for very long, given the distances involved with the U.S. and the air power now?
Well, the answer to that question is not much. I mean, we don't have forces on the ground in partnership with them, and we can't. We will certainly support from the air where and when feasible, but that's no substitute for leadership on the ground. It's no substitute for political leadership in Kabul. It's no substitute for using the capabilities and capacity that we know they have. They have an air force the Taliban doesn't. They have modern weaponry and organizational skills the Taliban doesn't. They have superior numbers to the Taliban. And so, again, they have the advantages. And it's really now their time to use those advantages. And as for your first question, again, I don't want to get into specifics about each and every airstrike and how they're conducted. What I would tell you is that where and when they are feasible, we use the capabilities that we have most available to meet the needs of whatever that strike mission and whatever that package needs to be. And we always, in any case, factor in force protection on any military operation we conduct, and that includes aerial strikes on the ground. Okay, I got to keep going here, guys. Stay with me here. Dan Lamoth.
Yes, thank you. Two follow-ups, please, on the vaccine issue. Realize it's early, but can you elaborate at all on what this might mean for deployments, preparation for deployments, those sorts of things? And then on Afghanistan, can you elaborate a bit on just what some of the recent U.S. operations, airstrikes, et cetera, have looked like over the last several days? Lots of questions are getting directed up to the OSD level at this point, and I'm just trying to get clarity and some additional transparency. Thanks.
Yeah, Dan. On your first one, we don't have specifics right now in terms of what the new vaccination policies are what effects are going to have on deployments. As the Secretary put in his memo, we want a healthy and ready force. That means a force that's ready to deploy. Until these vaccines become mandatory, we continue to want to appeal to a sense of teamwork among the unvaccinated service members in the force, that this isn't just about you. It's about your ship. It's about your platoon. It's about your squadron. It's your opportunity to contribute to the health and readiness of your teammates and thereby the nation. Now, once they become mandatory, they will become mandatory. As for the effect on deployers between now and mandatory, again, we're still working through that, as I said at the outset, and we'll have, I think, more defined policy prescriptive requirements and restrictions in the very near future. On airstrikes, Dan, not going to be a satisfying answer, but it'll be an honest one. We're not going to get into specific details of each and every strike, where, when, what kind of ordnance. We continue to fly airstrikes in support of Afghan forces on the ground where and when feasible. I know you're probably tired of me saying that, but that's the truth. Where and when feasible, knowing that it is not going to always be feasible. We have conducted airstrikes in the last several days, but I won't get into the specifics about targeting and BDA and that kind of thing. Okay, well, let me go back here to the room. I've been pretty good about that. Yeah, Rio.
Thank you. I have two questions. On vaccine mandate, the U.S. forces frequently interact with allies forces in military exercises, for example. Do you hope allies will also require their forces to get vaccinated in the future to do a joint operation smoothly and safely?
These are sovereign decisions by nation states with respect to their armed forces, and we're in no position to dictate how and when they likewise seek COVID protection for their forces.
Okay, on a separate topic, the Secretary met the Palau's president last week.
Yeah.
Then Palau requested the U.S. to construct a new military base when the former Secretary Esper visited Palau last year. Did you have any progress in the meeting to build new military facilities or bases to create a more distributed force posture in the Western Pacific?
The Secretary was delighted to meet with President Whips last week, and they had a very good conversation. It was not centered around the construction or additional or building of additional infrastructure to support U.S. forces. He did thank President Whips, of course, for the rotational support that we do get from Palau. It's modest in size, but it's important. It's important for, again, our network of alliances, partnerships, and friendships in the Indo-Pacific region. But there was nothing specific discussed or agreed upon with respect to additional infrastructure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Paul Henley from AFP. A couple things. One, can you, following up on the earlier question, can you say how many bombing flights or strikes have taken place, and does the U.S. have the capacity to increase those, or are you at the limits, the over-horizon limits right now?
I do not, and I won't get into a specific number. And as for our capacity, we have a pretty robust over-the-horizon capability already in the region, and we're going to continue to use it, again, where and when it makes the most sense, where and when it's feasible. As for whether it needs to step up or step down, that's going to depend, again, on the conditions on the ground and what is feasible from our perspective in terms of effectiveness.
So you said, as you've said...
But I'm not, what I want to walk you away from is this idea that we plan to accelerate or we plan to decelerate. We're going to continue to support them where and when feasible.
You could accelerate if you...
We have a robust capability in the region.
You said before and said again today that things are getting worse. We've heard that for several weeks, and that the Afghan leadership needs to step up. Clearly, if things are getting worse, they're not doing what they need to do. What do they need to do? Are they failing?
That is not a question that the department's going to take a position on, Paul. As I've said, they have all the advantages It's really about using those advantages to maximum effect. That question is much better put to Afghan officials in Kabul and in the field, not to the Department of Defense.
Can we, because this has been going on for 4-6 weeks, 2 months already, to say that same thing. What aren't they doing that they could do to stop this advance of the Taliban? I mean, clearly you're supporting them to stop it, but it's not working.
I just don't think that that's an assessment we're going to make here from the Department of Defense, and those are questions better put to Afghan officials. This is, as I said, when we look back, it's going to come down to leadership and what leadership was demonstrated or not. And I'm not going to get into an assessment here day by day of what they're doing right or what they're doing wrong. It's certainly here from Washington, not being there on the field alongside Afghan forces, it would be inappropriate for us to do that. Yeah, in the back there.
Sorry, I want to follow up on this. Is it a political question or failure, in your opinion?
Again, I'm not going to assess the decisions that Afghan officials are or are not making. Those are questions that really should be put to them to speak to how they're executing their strategy. It's not a U.S. military strategy. It's Afghan strategy to defend their own people, and they should speak to that, not to us. What we can speak to is that we're going to maintain a good relationship with Afghan forces going forward. We're going to continue to help them defend themselves to the best ability we have for the remainder of the drawdown, and I'm not going to speculate about what it's going to look like beyond that.
Okay, given the last developments in the last 72 hours, do you still find it relevant to say the mission was successfully accomplished in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I mean, I assume you're talking about the U.S. mission in Afghanistan. The president has said that we accomplished the mission for which our troops were sent to Afghanistan, and that was to disrupt and defeat al-Qaeda and the threat that al-Qaeda represented to the homeland, and that mission has been complete. The president has made that clear.
But we are going back 20 years back.
The other thing the president has said is that we're not going to allow Afghanistan to be a safe haven from which terrorist groups can attack the homeland. That's why we're going to maintain an over-the-horizon counterterrorism capability in the region.
If I may, one more question on
Sure.
Iran. Secretary Blinken said there will be a collective response for the attack against Mercer, the Iran in the Arab Sea. The question: are you engaged? Are you going to be engaged in this collective response?
I'm not going to speak to potential operations of the United States military at all. I never do. But I believe what Secretary Blinken was referring to was an overall interagency effort to better deal with the continued threats posed by Iran and for their support to terrorist networks, which we call on them to stop. Sam Legrone, USNI.
Hey, John, just following up on that point, it looks to be that, Iran is continuing to harass merchant ships in the Middle East. Specifically, there's some relatively credible circumstantial evidence that an Iranian military force attempted to seize control of a merchant ship. Is the secretary concerned at the level of rising, seemingly Iranian actions or Iranian-enabled proxy actions against merchant shipping in the region?
I think it's fair to say that we're concerned as we watch Iran's increasingly aggressive and malign behavior throughout the region without speaking to an individual situation. You cited two, but without speaking to any one in particular. We obviously are watching with great concern Iran's continued use of intimidation and aggression in the region, and of course their continued support for proxy militia as well as proxy terrorist groups.
Call you. Okay. But I'm glad you're calling. Hey, John.
I think we might have lost him. Let me go to Jeff, and then I'll finish up with you, Jim. Okay, Jeff Shogel.
And then
Thank
we're going
you.
to want
I can barely hear you because someone is having a phone conversation while this briefing is going on. Thank you.
And then,
Mr. Kirby, just a quick question.
Yeah, John. Let me call you back, Danny. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I know you can't say what might happen if someone refuses to get vaccinated, but you can say what happens if someone refuses to get one of the 17 mandatory vaccines now. As things now stand, what happens?
Jeff, I think I got the gist of the question. It's okay. I think I got the gist of the question.
Okay. Okay. So I'll contact them and have them shipped to you guys, basically.
Oh my God.
Can you hear me?
I don't.
All right.
Dude, news hour, you're on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Jeff, is that you?
Yes, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
My question is.
No, Jeff, I got your question. I got it. You don't need to repeat it. I got it. I'm not gonna. I understand the question, and I certainly can't speak to every case where an individual member of the armed services refuses to take a required vaccine. First of all, we don't have any evidence that suggests that this is a widespread problem right now. I think members of the military understand when you sign up for the military that there are requirements laid upon you, and some of those requirements include being healthy and fit and ready to serve. And some of that depends on our requirement to make sure you're fit and healthy through inoculation and vaccination, as well as a whole host of other medical treatment that you get when you sign up. And so it isn't a widespread issue, and to the degree that it happens, my assumption is that is dealt with at the command level. And I would again, I'm not going to speculate about going forward here, but I would again point you to what the Secretary said in his memo today. It has every expectation that commanders, once this new vaccination program is in place, i.e. it's mandatory, are going to implement that new program with skill and with professionalism, the same skill and professionalism they do now for existing mandatory vaccines, as well as compassion. Jim.
And just to sort of build on that, I guess it's something like 73% of the active duty force now has had at least one shot of vaccine. And probably the last third of the Secretary's memo was urging service members to just get the vaccine. Given that the Delta variant has already sort of driven up vaccination levels, do you expect that alone and putting this mid-September date on that might make a lot of guys and gals who are on the fence go and get the vaccine?
We certainly hope so, Jim. Again, as I said, I think it was in answer to Megan, you can consider this memo not just a warning order to the services, but to the troops themselves. And we certainly hope that they will take advantage of the opportunity to get the vaccines now, that are available now to them on a voluntary basis. That's obviously a potential effect that we'd like to see achieved as a result of the Secretary's message. But if they don't, eventually we're going to get to a mandatory sort of regimen, and we'll take care of it then. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it.
For the total force and National
73% of the force has received one dose, and I can get you the exact number, but I think we're over 62% are fully vaccinated.
No.
It's active duty.
Active duty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.